Let's turn this subject now to Ukraine, which has become perhaps as or even more fundamental to Putin's identity. He has embarked upon this war, which he thought would reunite Ukraine with Mother Russia. In fact, it appears to have boomeranged. And now it appears that the Ukrainians have the upper hand. Is that your assessment?
That is my assessment. The Ukrainians have really staged an extraordinary turnaround. I mean, Russia outnumbers them in resources and population to a dramatic degree. It's really extraordinary, what a mismatch there is in this conflict. And yet in recent months, Ukraine has actually managed to win territory back from the Russians. The Russians are now net losers of territory. Not a huge amount, but that's still a very, very striking fact. A Russian military blogger, one of these kind of tolerated critics of the war from the right in Russia, has recently come out with the assessment that the Ukrainians now have 70 drones for every Russian soldier on the front line. That is an extraordinary statistic coming from the Russians, yeah? It's now estimated that the Ukrainians are killing more Russians. In April, I believe it was 30,000, than Russia can recruit each month. So there is now a net loss trend among Russian manpower. And that is absolutely extraordinary, right? The most dramatic thing, of course, is that Ukraine has now developed its own drone alternatives that to some Western weapons that enable it to strike mid-range and also deep inside Russia. You remember when we gave the Ukrainians the HIMARS, medium-range rocket launching system? That was absolutely devastating for the Russians, but they gradually figured out ways to neutralize the threat. Well, guess what? The Ukrainians then developed drones that could do the same thing at the same distances. And they are now using an extended campaign of those drones to cut Russia off from its own forces in Crimea. And what's more, they've even developed long-range drones that are striking thousands of miles inside Russia, oil refineries, ports, petrochemical plants. And they're not just striking at these, immediate close-up military targets. They're hitting strategic military industrial targets like oil refineries. And they're not just blowing up storage tanks. They're blowing up key infrastructure that is really hard to repair. So this is becoming a serious strategic threat to Putin at a very fundamental level. I was just watching some video reports that came out of Russia from Russians blogging on their phones and getting the stuff out through VPNs, where, they were saying, look at this gas line. This gas line goes on forever. And now I'm hearing air raid sirens. What the hell is happening? Was the world coming to an end? That was one of the clips I saw. So the Ukrainians are bringing the war home to the Russians to an extraordinary degree. It's really incredible to watch.
How long do you think Russia can sustain this kind of economic damage?
I think they can sustain it for a while yet, but they really have to start thinking hard about how to sustain it. Putin just held this high-profile economic conference in St. Petersburg, and one of the notable absences was his central bank chairperson, Elvira Naibulina. She is one of the people credited with keeping the Russian economy afloat amid all of these difficulties, and she was just not there, which was kind of a striking signal because the finance minister recently warned Putin that the fiscal deficit in Russia is spiking. The oligarchs are clearly becoming very restive. Oil exports are dramatically down. The Europeans are cranking up sanctions, and it's not a pretty situation for Russia.
There's increasing talk that Putin's own position could be jeopardized inside this system that he's created.
Yes.
Is that a serious possibility, or is the wish the father of the thought?
It's very hard to assess from the outside, of course, just what sort of threat, how strong that threat is. I think there is a threat. It is striking that we consistently see reports of high-ranking Russians mysteriously falling out of windows.
There was one just yesterday. Another.
Yeah, exactly. Why are elite members of the Russian elite, losing their lives in such conspicuous ways? And of course, the most obvious assumption is he needs to intimidate the people who are still there, right?
What would be the
So he's clearly afraid of something.
Right.
It's very hard to know how serious the threat is. My own sense is it's not perhaps as immediate as some people are depicting it. But, I lived through the collapse of the dictatorship in East Germany in 1989. They had the highest number of secret police informers of any society in the world. That government was the most buttoned down repressive government in the world at the time. No one thought it could crack. But then one day it did.
What would Putin be able at this point, if he chose, to launch a 1936 style Great Purge inside Russia?
He certainly could do it if he wanted to. Stalin did that at the moment of tremendous peril to the Soviet Union. It wasn't exactly a rational choice at the time. To do that during a major war with a nearby adversary seems crazy. But who knows what kind of scenarios.
But if he was intent on terrorizing the population into submission and eradicating what he viewed as disloyal opposition, I've even read that some people are speculating that he has sort of a binary choice, either to loosen up and try and allow the economy to flourish a little bit, or to launch a massive crackdown.
He certainly could try to launch a massive crackdown. And as you note, there are people within the country who are advocating something like that. One thing he has done is to crack down on the internet, right? He's now almost completely severed the Russian internet from the outside world. And Russians are crying bloody murder over that because a lot of them were, commercially dependent on using the internet. They relied on it. They relied on YouTube for advertising and for all sorts of things. And there's been a tremendous outcry, both from ordinary Russians and from high-ranking people in the business community. I think that's his compromise on the issue that you're talking about. Launching a Stalin-style purge seems quite risky, but I don't think he feels like he has the room to loosen up either.